So today, continuing on the theme of analysis, we're going to discuss burdens of proof and how to use them in arguments. Generally, this is a method that is advisable for you to start practicing in any argument when you manage to do so. I'm going to discuss briefly why this is a very advisable method to do this, but before that, what are burdens of proof for arguments? So the idea is arguments have subclaims that construct it. These are the burdens of proof for the argument. That means if A and B and C stand, then the conclusion of them has to be the bottom line of your argument. I'll start with a simple example. If I want to prove Jane is using an umbrella now, saying it is raining is not yet proving it. I need to prove A, that it is indeed raining, and B, that when it is raining, Jane is using an umbrella. If both of these claims are true, then the logical conclusion has to be that Jane is indeed using an umbrella now. Please note, even if all burdens are identified correctly, the argument still cannot stand unless all burdens are proven to also be true. So it could be possible also that it is in fact not raining now. The burdens are still identified correctly, but if we have failed to prove the premises, the bottom line will not arrive. So to make a quick recap of this, we are looking for the subclaims that have to be proven for the argument to be proven, and we need to prove each of these subclaims to be true. Before I move on to why it's important, just to make sure that we understand what it is, are there any questions on this? Okay. Why do we want to use burdens of proof? Actually, I want to do a page up for a sec because I don't want to give you in the example yet. I want us to do this together. Let's say the motion is this house would cancel maternity leave for women. Say Prime Minister analyzes for full 7 minutes why maternity leaves make an incentive for employers to discriminate against women. And I want you to assume that the analysis was almost bulletproof in proving the incentive. They gave many different reasons as to why it's probably the case. How would you try and rebut that? This is one of those points when we want you to try and engage as well. Exactly. In other words, Prime Minister has missed a burden. For 7 minutes, they analyzed the incentive to discriminate, but not in a word did they explain the ability to discriminate. The reason this is important is because time is the most expensive, limited resource we have in debate. At the point at which the Prime Minister wasted 7 minutes on an argument that can be rebutted in 10 seconds, it's a bad strategy for Prime Minister and a good position for OO. So, what do we conclude from this? Firstly, using burdens of proof, identifying what are the burdens that we need to fill in for the arguments, makes them more immune to rebuttals in the first place. It makes it harder for the other side to find a 10 seconds response that takes down our argument. Secondly, it also makes our analysis more efficient time-wise. What do I mean by that? Often I get asked by speakers, how do they know that the analysis is efficient? They can always add more and more and more layers and reasons for why something is true. Where does the line draw? And the most effective way to answer this would be using burdens of proof. If you have fulfilled all of the different burdens for your argument, it means your analysis is efficient. In most cases, you will not need 7 minutes to analyze just one burden. It will be more efficient to identify what needs to be proven and then answer each of these burdens. I hear someone is unmuted. Is there a question? Okay. Thirdly, it also helps us rebut arguments more effectively. Being able to identify what burdens the other side missed makes our rebuttals more efficient. Just like Artem just did answering my question, if we were to try and answer the analysis per se, like each of the different reasons, and answer 7 minutes of reasons why employers have an incentive by giving our own analysis on why employers don't have an incentive, we would waste so much time and probably fail because, honestly, intuitively, it's probably true in real life. It is much easier to identify which burden wasn't analyzed sufficiently and engage that. Lastly, it's more effective to weigh our vertical extensions. By vertical extensions, I mean analysis extensions, or when we don't give a new argument, but new analysis for an existing argument. And the problem most speakers have with vertical extensions is they aren't able to weigh why their extension is more important than what top half already did. It's easy if top half only gave an assertion, but it will rarely be the case that they gave a complete assertion. So just saying we had better analysis doesn't tell judges why. What makes your analysis better? Telling judges, our top half missed this crucial burden, we are going to fill it in, explains exactly why your extension is important. So in this case, if I were CG in this example, I would probably want to analyze why we aren't effective or can't be effective in enforcing anti-discrimination laws. And therefore, the only way is to abolish maternity leave.
Yeah.
Other questions so far?
On this point, I'm not sure if it's on this theme, but how you would, as a judge, how you would interpret, or I don't know, the first government and the second government. Why the second government wins? Because he didn't explain the part of the first government, this piece of analysis.
It depends a lot on what the closing government tells me as they're weighing or what is more important, because I don't want to insert myself too much in thinking for them what would be the weighing. Some cases are much clearer, such as in this example, if literally the only thing that is contested is what CG said, if all of OG's material is in concession, OO says, yeah, we agree they have an incentive, they just don't have an ability, then obviously CG's material on why they also have the ability will be more important, because this ended up being the clash in the debate. In other debates, if it's not that clear cut, bottom half will need to explain to me why the burden that they filled in is the most important one. Does that answer the question?
I mean, just one thing to add on in general, guys, you're doing this, like everybody's doing this already. The problem is that you're doing this by intuition, by like being very passive about it, and by like you are deciding, like every time you decide what you want to analyze, you're deciding what you think is the burden of proof. The problem is usually it's not really thought out, like you haven't really given it time to think about, is this my burden of proof? What do I actually need to prove? And that's what we want to instill in today's lecture, because like there is a path. Right, like the first step, you are doing this very passively by intuition. The next step is to do it very actively, so next time in the future it becomes intuition that is correct. So like, for example, at the moment I don't have to think about burdens because they come very naturally to me how things about, but like I think you need to how do you say, always take a step back and zoom out of the debate. And that's what I saw, for example, when we were doing the exercise with you and when I was judging the debate. Like people just need to sometimes take a step backwards from what they did, like zoom out, like similarly to how you look at like artwork or something like this. Like you have a completely different perspective if you go back a couple of steps and then you can see a fuller picture or something like this. And that is where the burdens come in, like actively thinking about them can help you basically like not throw the dice, and like throwing the dice, you obviously might win sometimes, but like you want to increase your chances of winning, and that's why this is so important to pay attention to and think about actively. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions other than that so far before I move on to how we identify burdens of proof, which is probably the hardest part? I'll take that as no questions. Let's move on. How do we find burdens of proof? There are several methods. It's not super easy, and there's no like a clear-cut scheme that we can use and copy for each argument. The burdens vary depending on the argument, but some good practices to help us find them. First, and the best way, ask yourself where the argument is likely to be challenged. The point of burdens is to make sure that you fill in every sub-case that needs to be true so that a one-line rebuttal cannot answer the case. Meaning that the best way to identify what are the burdens, what we need to analyze, is to identify what is contested, what the other side is probably going to argue against. By the way, we'll see soon later on when we also discuss prioritization between burdens, that identifying what is likely to be challenged will also help us identify what needs to be prioritized. So like the example I think we gave in the first session of this house would ban smoking cigarettes, usually the burden of cigarettes are bad for you or unhealthy is existing, but very, very small because it's unlikely anyone would argue against it. Whereas the burden of people are not able to make a free choice about the use of cigarettes is probably a larger one. As a follow-up on this, ask your partner to help you also. Like during prep, ask your partner how they would rebut the argument. Try actively rebutting your own case so you can use this to identify all of the things that you need to prove. Secondly, have a concrete and debate-winning bottom line. The bottom line doesn't always have to be the headline. Sometimes it's a bit too long to be the headline. It's not so crucial. The point is, I see it often. People, like speakers, give bottom lines that are very generic and don't prove an argument that necessarily wins anything. Classic example, black market. The motion will lead to a creation of a black market. Ask yourself, if I have proven the bottom line of the argument, did I necessarily win the debate? In the case of my bottom line being black market, anyone wants to tell me why this might not be a debate-winning bottom line?
Well, I think it is not clear what the black market gives us as good or bad, and that's why it is not a very well-proven bottom line.
Let's do a bit of an extra of this. So the question I want to ask myself when making a bottom line is, assuming I made the analysis perfect, assuming I proved the bottom line beyond reasonable doubt, is the bottom line winning? Let's assume that I definitely proved the existence of a black market. Why might it still lose?
In the Russian slang, what it gives to you means like, what's the actual consequence of that? So black market can be good or bad depending on circumstances. So it doesn't give us anything in the sense that it doesn't give a specific conclusion.
Okay, so first we identify that we need to prove that it is bad. We need to prove what the black market is. Let's say that we prove the black market is bad. Still, is it necessarily winning? I want you to assume the other side also gives argument. This is a reasonable assumption in most debates. Is black market a silver bullet argument that wins all other arguments if proven?
No.
Anyone has any more ideas?
If government have some tools to control this black market or to stop people from break the law, then we have some tools to deal with it. And only the fact that some people will break the law doesn't mean that this law shouldn't be incorporated.
Exactly. If I wanted to even make it a bit sharper and just give the counter example to ridicule this, I would say on opposition, everything that is illegal has a black market. There is a black market for killing people because it's illegal to kill people, so you have people doing it for pay. Does it mean that we need to legalize murder? Probably not, because we prefer it to happen much less frequently, even if it is a black market that we cannot regulate. In other words, just proving the existence of it is not showing anything that is a comparative metric to win the debate with. If, as opposed to this, I prove the following bottom line, majority of the addicts that consume drugs will continue consuming them even when they are illegal. Only now they will do it less safely as opposed to in a regulated market under our proposal. Can anyone tell me what's the difference between this bottom line and the earlier one? What is added? What makes it stronger?
I think I think here you should also prove that most of the people would use this, but the stronger part is that you prove that there are much people. There are those people who are using this stuff on the legal market would use it in the illegal market, in the black market, but also there are no such things to see it or
So to protect people or to oversee it.
yeah.
So in other words, both of you identified correctly that one crucial word that I added at this bottom line is the word majority. First, I started by saying it's not just something that exists. It's impacting most of the people who are impacted by the debate. A second thing is, in order to make this bottom line stand, I also necessarily prove that it is worse than the regulated market. I don't make it as easy to say, oh, but everything has a black market. Heroin is bad enough, even when it is legal. Why should we care about it being a black market? How regulations help? I already say that I prove it to be worse than the legal market. And I already say that under our side, we are able to prevent it. So the step back from this is understanding if we make a bottom line that is debate winning, that is answering the question, if we prove this to be true, does it win the debate? We usually also get the burdens of proof from the bottom line. Note how this bottom line already tells me that my burdens are to prove A, that majority of the addicts will still consume, B, that drugs sold in the black market are worse than the ones that are regulated, and C, that under our side, there is no black market. Obviously, also the earlier part of under their side, there is a black market. I couldn't
Go and I'll finish my point after.
No, so the point is I couldn't have derived these burdens so easily from just using the term black market. It's much easier to derive them from an actual concrete debate-winning bottom line. Milos, your stage.
But you need to. But the point of it all is that usually when people are writing arguments, you're going from top to the bottom, from top to the page to the bottom of the page, and then just continuing or something like this. But just breaking it down, even with this bottom line, even if it sounds clear to you, just breaking it down into like these three parts, and then either writing it on a piece of paper and like creating like a map of your argument for yourself that tells you, okay, from point A to point B, which is from point A legalizing drugs to point B, my impacts. I have these three steps and like illustrate it to yourself. I think like this visualization of the things can help you a lot not to forget to do all of these things. So you don't write, like usually the way that I write on a piece of paper, the way practically that I would tell you is not like I write, let's say that the first burden is majority of addicts consume drugs even if it's illegal, and then I write reasons for this, and then I go to the second one. No, what I would propose to you is to write this first line, then leave the space enough for like 3 to 4 reasons for this, and then like I do like an arrow to the second burden, which is like then this brings us to this, which is that the black market drugs are less safe, and then this leads to the disappearance of black market, right? Like so you need to make your paper, and we will talk more about papers, more high level, and then insert the reasons, because then you will have a better grasp of how you're doing and how you're fulfilling the burdens, rather than like if you go and that's like very logical for people. If you go chronologically, if you go from top to the bottom of the paper, you leave some things out, your brain moves on automatically, right? Like, I've done with this point, so let's move on, this paper is done, rather than thinking that you should always go back and you should always check on your previous steps and stuff. And that's like practically maybe the most important thing that you need to realize from the lecture, to zoom out and to think a bit about differently, not fulfilling a task, but returning to a task and redoing it.
Yeah. 100%. We always start by identifying what are the burdens and only then start filling them in, not vice versa. We don't first do our analysis and then divide it into burdens, because this is the shortest way to miss some burdens. As a rule of thumb, There are two burdens which are going to be applicable in most arguments, which I've noticed in judging that most speakers often miss or are most commonly missed. Firstly, why your side of the debate solves the problem. That is, it is usually very easy or intuitive for speakers to analyze something is bad, and they forget to show the counterfactual, their side of the motion, to actually solve it. By the way, this is classically applicable in black market arguments. It's very easy to show that even when you have a legal market, you also have a black market parallel to it that also sells the worst kind of drugs in addition to the legal ones. So showing that under your side, you're actually able to eliminate the problem is going to be applicable in most arguments. Secondly, a comparative element. What do I mean by this? As I've said earlier, you want your arguments to be constructed in a manner that, if proven, win the debate. For this to be the case, they have to be comparative, because there are always going to be arguments on the other side as well, and you need your argument to be more important than the other side. In this example, the comparative element was the burden of proving majority of addicts. This gives us the comparison of we have the impact on more people in the debate. Comparative elements can be varied, right? It can be the most important population in the debate. It can be the highest impact in the debate. It doesn't matter, and it varies from argument to argument. But almost every argument will need to have at least one burden that compares it to the rest of the debate, that shows why it is debate winning, comparatively speaking. Lastly, practice is the best way to learn how to make burdens of proof correctly. As Milos said, at some point, it becomes a natural thing for you. You don't need to spend time in prep thinking of them very actively, because they pop up to your head very intuitively after you've done it for many times. We are going to go through soon some cookie cutters of very common arguments and their burdens of proof. But just a step back from it before we go through the examples. In every debate that you do, I want you to try and analyze your arguments through burdens actively, even if at first it is harder, it takes more time during your prep. It might mean that you are going to have at the beginning worse arguments because you spent more time on thinking of them, didn't find the correct ones, and then ended up losing. This is what practices are for, to lose in the practice so we can win in the competition. And if it didn't work eventually, if you didn't manage to find or identify correctly your burdens, ask your chair judge, what do you think were the burdens of proof for this argument? And if you didn't identify them in the debate or your chair didn't find them for you, go back home later on when you have more time, prep is stressful, and think in retrospect, what should I have proven for this argument to stand? The more that we practice it, the more that we actually force ourselves to find the burdens for more different arguments, the easier it will come to us, because arguments tend to repeat themselves. They have a lot of similarities between different debates. So if we do it often, it will just come faster from one debate to another. Other questions before we go through analyzing some examples? Cool. Cookie cutters. We'll start with the first one, which should be easier for you because we already gave one example of this. Only difference is, in the last slide, we discussed a specific argument. That is the black market, and specifically a debate about drugs. I want you to try and extrapolate from it now, from the example to the more general case. What do you think are the burdens of proof for every black market argument in any debate? You can take a minute or so to think of this, and anyone who has an idea for a burden that needs to be proven is welcome to suggest it.
Can I clarify what exactly are we going to prove? That the black market will still exist or will disappear? Or
in every debate that is relevant to legalizing or banning something, it is possible that you will want to prove a black market argument. I intentionally don't word the bottom line for you because the bottom line changes from debate to debate. I argue that whether the debate is about organ selling, sex work, drugs, any sort of things that you can ban the sale of or legalize the sale of, there are still going to be very similar burdens for all of the black market arguments for all of these different debates. I want us to try and find them together.
Well, maybe that stuff on black market will be more expensive because it's illegal. And if it's illegal, it's harder to to get this stuff on the black market, to deliver it, to buy it from other I don't know, sellers. So that's why it will be more expensive.
So I think you're in a good direction. I would try to go broader than just expensive. Expensive isn't always the strongest impact we can prove to make a debate, like a debate-winning argument. As an example, if we go back to the example we gave earlier on drugs, proving heroin is more expensive on the black market is probably not something that is going to make the judge think, so obviously we need to legalize heroin to make it accessible and cheap for everyone who wants to consume it. What is more
I think it could be more dangerous than legal, the first one. The second one, the same amount of people or comparable, same amount of people would use those drugs.
Okay. Yeah? So 2 burdens suggested now, you want to go through them. Firstly, I would use even a more generic term than more dangerous to make it most applicable to most different debates. The black market is worse than the regulated market. This is the first claim that we need to prove for the argument to be debate winning. If the black market isn't worse, if the goods that we are banning or legalizing is bad enough in and of itself, we're not going to prove a delta by showing that there will be a black market of it. At worst, we are showing that the motion isn't fully effective. So we want to start by proving that the black market is worse than the legal one. Second one, which was also just suggested, that the amount of people using the black market is going to be sufficient for this to be a bad thing. In most cases, it would mean proving that most people who use the market legally or would use the market legally would continue using it illegally. Sometimes it won't be possible to show the same amount of people. Sometimes it is possible to show the most important people, those most in need, etc. But in any case, we'll need to prove that enough people use it and it's not just a niche thing happening. So we actually care about this. What other burdens? We covered 2.
Maybe we also need to prove that the government will not be able to crack down on the black market and destroy it.
Yeah, definitely. We need to prove that the problem exists in the first place. And after we prove that the problem exists, what is the next burden always?
That we solve it.
The problem is important for us.
Problem is important. We discussed already when we said that the market is worse than the legal one. But I don't know who just suggested the right solution. After every time we prove a problem exists, we also want to prove that the problem is solved under our side. Our side of the motion eliminates the black market. So a recap. 4 burdens which are going to be roughly applicable to every black market argument in any debate. A, the ban isn't effective in preventing the trade, or in other words, the black market exists. B, majority of the consumers are not deterred by the black market and are going to continue using it. C, the black market is significantly worse than the regulated legal one. And lastly, legalization will solve the problem of the black market and abolish it, or at least mitigate it sufficiently.
And by the way, like in terms of this, it doesn't mean that you have to spend equal amount of time for all 4, right? Like some of them might be much easier for you to prove. Some of them might be challenged less. It just means that if you're not addressing it at all, you're putting yourself at a large risk. And that's also the case, right? It doesn't mean that if you don't fulfill all of the 4 burdens, you necessarily lose automatically or something like this, right? Somebody might fulfill less than you, right? But if you want to compete on the highest level, you need to address all 4. And out of all 4, you need to, emphasize, the one that will be attacked the most or something like this. So in this case, I don't know, like it depends on the debate. But for example, the significantly worse part might be one of the things that you would analyze the most, right? Like, because that's the thing that is bringing you, a lot of impacting from it. But if you fear that people might attack you, for example, on a lot of debates, like, we can regulate, then you need to have at least a minute of just explaining why you can't just regulate stuff away. And that's usually happening. It's not just about the black market. Usually regulation pops up as the alternative from opposition, means that your burden increases to a chance of spending a lot time explaining why regulation just doesn't solve or doesn't do anything to the debate. And that's something that you need to understand and realize and analyze by yourself. You need to spend some time during prep with your partner before it becomes your intuition, discussing these things, right? It cannot be something, we'll just figure it out. No, let's discuss this. What do we invest the most time in, and what do we do? That's very important.
100%. We're also going to have a full slide later on discussing exactly how to prioritize between burdens. And I think in the next examples, it will also be clearer to you that some burdens are more important than others. In general, burdens are not created equal. We need to think in advance which of them is more important and prioritize our time accordingly. Okay, let's do another example. Choice and autonomy. So in most debates about taking away someone's choice, such as banning a certain activity, whether it is banning smoking, whether it is banning drugs, whether it is banning, like, I don't know, it could be certain jobs in the market, banning paid surrogacy or whatever, we are violating someone's choice and autonomy. And usually the opposition then wants to argue that people having a free choice is a reason in itself to oppose the motion, that regardless of the outcome, we ought to give people the choice of what to do with their own lives. What do you think are the burdens for this argument?
Maybe to prove that we have a right to ban something, and maybe we should explain why do we have enough rights to do that. First of all, with the experience that we have, like for now we ban drugs or something, or with the enough amount of harm that somebody can get with that, and that explain why when there is an autonomy, for example, that people will have an irrational, maybe some kind of motion, and will choose something that will harm them enough.
Okay, so just a couple of remarks on this. The first one is, for this practice, it's assume that we are opposing harming choice. Like, the argument we want to prove is that we do want to protect people's choice, and we do want to let them choose to even take risks on themselves. So not the government argument, but the opposition argument in this case. Secondly, I want to point out, because I think it was constructive to learn from, assuming we would have been government on this, the identification that we want to prove a right to ban is important, but there are two things to learn from this. Firstly, proving that we have a right to ban is the bottom line. It's not the burdens yet. Having a right to ban something usually has sub-burdens of themselves. If you want, we'll do that soon. So after we do the opposition, after we show why people should have choice, we can go through the flip side of this, how we prove that we are legitimate in violating choice. Secondly, I want to note that the answer that was given now was also already starting to go into the analysis. So rather than the burden is right to ban, it also started to say how we can analyze it, like saying people might be irrational under the impact of drugs, etc. And I want to remind what Milos said earlier about starting by taking a step back and seeing the full picture before diving into the analysis. Always start by seeing what the burdens are. Don't jump into the analysis before you finish laying down all the burdens that you need to prove. So that being said,
so just to add one thing before you go, if I can. So don't overthink these, and that's the main point, right? The burdens are not necessarily something that is super complicated, that needs to be super philosophical. There are very obvious ones that sometimes just stares you at face, but because you think. Because burdens, like whenever you teach people burdens, people think it's a super complicated topic, and to some extent it is, especially if you go into strategy and like more high level things. But like on this level, right? Like there are very simple things that definitely come to mind, and you might think, but that's stupid, that's very obvious. But no, it's very important. Even though it sounds obvious to you, it doesn't mean that it's not a burden, right? So I'm not gonna tell you which one I think it's very obvious, but I'm just telling you, don't overthink it. Sometimes that also harms your ability to spot the most simple thing.
I won't tell you the answer, but I will remind you the earlier slides in which we learned how to identify burdens. Try to think actively in actual debates when you want to prove people have a right to choice. what do you think you need to prove? What the other side might challenge and say that is a reason why we shouldn't give someone a choice? This will help you identify your burdens.
So maybe we could say in the first place why people do have a choice, so that they are free in their choice in the status quo, or can be free or something. And second, which is I think more challenging, explaining like why choice matters. So why is it important for them to have a choice?
Okay, so we have two so far. Why choice is something that we care about in general, and why is choice something that exists under our side? Like, why is it free, informed, and rational, yada, yada? What else?
Why people can harm themselves when they understand the consequences of their actions.
So I think this goes into the why choice matters in the first place. Because this is usually when you want to explain why it is not dependent on consequence. Even if they harm themselves, it's still a choice, is a value in and of itself. What else, though? What are the other burdens that we can use?
I think that we can say that the government has no right to intervene in our choices if they are important.
So you're starting to go into the analysis of why choice matters. And if you want, we can discuss later how to prove choice matters in general. But I want you to go beyond that. Try to find what other burdens there are. Let's give a concrete example to maybe help you think of this. If I want to argue that I should have a choice to smoke cigarettes wherever and whenever I want, this is my right. What would you answer to me? What could be possible challenges?
I'd say that third parties suffer from your smoking.
Exactly. So what is another burden that we can derive from this potential challenge?
That we either can harm them or there is no harm at all.
So that the choice is impacting either only me or I am the most significant person impacted by it. Either one works. Usually the second will be more accessible. But the point is, if my choice impacts others as significantly as it impacts myself, the argument on choice and autonomy won't stand. So we always have the burden to prove that the choice is mostly impacting myself. And can anyone think of anything else?
Yeah, probably that. So try to prove that it's not a choice, really, it's addiction. So in case of smoking, it can be a choice when you start smoking, but then it's addiction. So it's hard to say that it's free choice all the time.
Okay, so we already covered this when we discussed that we need to prove why the choice is free, why the choice exists under our side. I think there's another burden that you might be missing. Does anyone have any more ideas before I reveal the answer? I want you to try and come up with it yourself.
I don't know if it's like another burden, but maybe why person can understand when there is a harm, and maybe why person is not interested in do the harm and do the right choice. Why person is interested in right choices?
Okay, so the point about it all goes back to the same burden, which you are correct in all in identifying that is usually the most important one, proving the choice does exist under our side, in which how specifically to do this, whether it is going to be challenged on being misinformed, on being irrational, or on being unfree because of different pressures, is going to vary based on the debate. But I think there's a separate burden to this. Even if we do prove that choice exists on our side, what else needs to be proven?
But to be fair, just to clarify to people, in some aspects, in some debates, that burden just exists by the virtue of the motion. So if the motion is very clear, like this house would ban cigarettes, it is, but there are some motions that are not as clear-cut as this house would just ban something, right? And you need to figure out this this last burden. You need to think of when it's not super clear, right?
I'll give you a hint. Remember what we discussed earlier are the two most common burdens that repeat in most arguments.
That the motion is eliminate the choice.
Exactly.
The motion grants choice. The motion solves the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, never miss this. Like in some motions, it's going to be less important than others. But do be aware that in some motions, it might be challenged.
No, exactly. But like that's, for example, the difference between the motion saying this house would ban cigarette consumption. That's like that burden doesn't exist. Obviously, it eliminates choice. But like, let's say that a bit softer version, it's still pretty hard, but softer version is this house would put sin taxes on like unhealthy products, right? Obviously, you still need to talk about, at least to some extent, why it eliminates choice, especially with poor people. Like, it's going to be easy for you to prove, but you will still need to prove it to some extent. And there are motions where it's even less clear, and you'll need to spend a bit more time on this. So as I said, like sometimes it's very clear, doesn't exist, but sometimes.
I'll give you an example of a motion where I think this missing this burden is very common. In the motion, this house would ban the consumption of sex work. People often go about discussing the right of sex workers to decide what to do with their body, making it super easy for the other side to say, okay, no one is banning them from doing sex work. We are never going to criminalize them. We think they are the victims. We only criminalize the consumers. So the burden here that is often missed is to prove why the motion in the first place harms the choice. Why when you ban consumption, you effectively also ban the employment.
Yeah.
So to recap on this, burdens. Choice is important. The choice in the case relevant to this debate affects only or mostly the maker of the choice. The choice that is harmed under the motion, or the status quo, depending on which side we are. And under our side, we do have valid choice. The choice is free, informed, and rational. Just to try and practice this for a sec, intuitively, of those burdens, do you think there are some that you identify to be more or less important than others? Which one do you think is the least likely to be challenged in most debates? Not all debates, but most debates.
I think choice is important. This is the least, yeah.
Agreed. In most debates, it's not that you can say nothing on it, but it's unlikely that someone will say, no, we don't care about choice. No one wants choice. It is possible that you will need to analyze why choice is more important than utility in some aspects. By the way, one of the easiest way to do this would be to use people's personal information on their own life. So only you know your own individual circumstances and what is better for you. The state cannot make a blanket policy that will be best for everyone, which is why choice is important. But there are other ways to do this depending on the motion. In most motions, this will be the least important burden. What do you think?
Usually, sorry, no, just to add on that train as well. Usually, a very good thing to prove why choice is important is because it's kind of like a principle. If we deny choice here, we allow you to make all kind of other stupid choices in your life, or all kind of choices that impact your life even more, right? You choose your school, you choose where you go, you choose how you dress. And all of these things could have been done by somebody who's more knowledgeable, better, technocratic, or something than you, or something like this. So insofar that they think that somebody better should always make a decision, they should also be willing to concede your whole life to some extent being guided by something that is more knowledgeable than you. And that's going to be a hard burden for the other side to prove. But we're going to go into raising the burdens, I think, one of the next weeks, and the strategic view of the burdens a bit.
I'd say that the least challenged would likely to be like that the choice is taken away, or that it exists on, or that because it is just normally embedded in the motion, right?
So that depends really a lot on the motion, but it is correct that in many motions, this will be the less important burden. Like if the motion is clear-cut banning something, most often it means that we can assume that it harms freedom. Not always, but most often. And which do you think most often is likely to be the most important burden?
The last one, that the choice on the other side is rational, because we can easily prove that there are different factors that value in this process and why people are irrational, and there is an asymmetry of the information.
Yeah, exactly. So again, changes from debate to debate, prioritization changes, but most often the reason why people justify patronizing policies is because they argue people cannot make choices for themselves, either because they don't know well enough or because they are impacted by different pressures and stuff like that. So most often, the most important burden will be to show that under our side, choice is free.
But keep in mind that in these sort of situations, people also tend to go very simplistic, right? You need to have all of the information so you can make the choice or something like this. And that's not even how we consider choice at the status quo, right? And sometimes people just put some like when they define what choice needs to be free and informed, by their own definition, none of the choice I ever made or any of us made in our life would be free, right? In that sort of situations, because we never have enough information. We never have. So there is like a good way to combat this like sometimes sterile version of choice always needs to be super informed, super free, no coercion, none of these things, because in real life it's never going to be as clear cut as that. And that doesn't mean that we now completely like disregard something or take it away or do not take it away because of this. So just keep in mind that it's a bit more nuanced than what people are usually.
Yeah, that's an important comment. All of the three factors that I've listed here, like free, informed, and rational, none of them are a binary. It's never 100% free or 100% coerced. It's usually on a spectrum and somewhere in the gray area. And the interesting question in most debates is, where do we draw the line? Like my favorite example is how in many debates, when people discuss free choice, they like to use economic pressures. Yeah. The choice to work in sex work or paid surrogacy or whatever is not free because poor people are pressured by their need of money to do this. According to this logic, we need to ban poor people from taking jobs ever because they're always impacted by economic pressures.
Yes, like you can mock this argument very freely and get a lot of speaker points because of this. Because literally going into consulting, working until midnight, to like in horrible conditions is also like you're coerced by having shit ton of money thrown at you. Like it's not that clear cut. So just be nuanced. That's another lesson for today. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The next argument is a bit harder. Just
I hate these arguments.
Yeah, Milos and I have a not the same preference to these arguments. I actually tend to like message arguments, have a full workshop on those. So just to be clear by what I mean by message arguments, so we can do the burdens of proof for them together. If we want to prove sending a certain message will be interpreted in a manner that will lead to something, okay? Whether it is a backlash argument, whether it is a legitimacy argument, whether it is saying people learn from violent movies to be violent in real life, any sort of argument that says because people get a certain message, they will act somehow. What are the burdens for these arguments?
And it's usually message of the state in particular. So like somebody official doing something sends a message.
Like maybe the most important one is that messages work, that like message leads to people doing anything in the first place differently.
So in other words, certainly one of the burdens is going to be that this will lead to an action, that people act upon the message. All right, what else?
I think the possible interpretation of the message is also a case.
Definitely, how people are likely to interpret it. What else?
What is the message?
Can you clarify a bit more about what you mean by what is the message?
I mean, how... Okay, I think it's more related to the previous term.
No. I do think it is actually a burden, but I want to just know that we mean the same thing by this.
I think I want to say that how it sounds.
So we want to analyze, usually, I think the burden here is how the message likely looks like or sounds like. Before we are able to analyze how people interpret it, we need to characterize what it is. Because it's not always clear-cut from the motion. Just to give an example, in the motion of this house would remove statues that commemorate historical heroes that did immoral acts. I usually want to argue for some backlash argument to say people will get mad about it. I usually want to characterize how this looks like. There's a difference between just saying, oh, they vanished, like they never existed, and saying, people are going to see the state actively destroying them. There are going to be videos and footages of the destruction machines breaking down the statues of your favorite heroes. You're going to see the ashes crumble. It's a bit of a demagoguery thing, but it is important, because in order to show how people interpret it, we need to show also how it looks like. And what else?
I think we have to make a link to the motion, so we have to show what is changes after these messages are published. What
changes? In other words, why is this message unique to one side of the debate? One of the easiest rebuttals to many of the backlash arguments, for example, is to say, but people who are bigoted will be bigoted on both sides. Like, just saying that they will get mad because of a certain policy, like, I don't know, if we legalize gay marriage, then conservative people will get angry. The answer would be, but they already are angry. What's the delta? So usually, if we want to analyze a message, we want to be able to show that it has a significant marginal difference from what exists on the other side.
I mean, for example, that is why I dislike these types of arguments, because usually the way that are presented is these two burdens are almost completely neglected. It's assumed that a person would act upon, and this is the thing, for example, that what you can learn, for example, that is the thing that I would attack immediately, and that's the thing that you need to understand, that most people will attack immediately if you see your argument. They would concede, I would concede everything before this. I don't care. Like, yeah, there will be a message, but there's nothing going to happen there. And who the fuck cares? Here's something more important or something like this. And then you skew the debate to other side. So the impact and like how does message connect to action cannot be vague. And that's what people usually leave it with, right? With like, yes, some people might act when they see this because they acted in the past. When seeing this or sends a signal or something, it needs to be much, much stronger and much, much more connected towards, I don't know, how society functions, giving a lot of mechanisms towards this.
And this also shows you not only how you need to analyze them yourself, but how you want to refute them when other people bring them. 90% of the times, people are going to forget this burden. Usually, when people give a backlash argument, the easiest answer is just to say, who cares? Okay, so people will get angry. I don't care what people think in their own minds. Just a caveat on this, though, because, and this will also connect us soon to how we prioritize between burdens. The prioritization is really dependent on what the debate is. And particularly in message arguments, the important thing to remember is there is a difference between if the debate is about a policy and you want to make an argument about the message of the policy, and if the debate is entirely about messages, such as, I don't know, a debate about banning violent video games or supporting some sorts of art or whatever. And the difference is, if the debate is about a policy and you want to make a message argument, the most important burden is going to be the impact, because in policy debates, showing impact of a message is hard. Whereas, if the debate is explicitly about art or film or whatever, it's most likely everyone in the debate will have an incentive to concede that the message is impactful. Like, it's not going to be an effective claim from the other side to say art doesn't change anything, because both sides want to say that art has an impact. They just want to show that the impact is bad or good. So if the motion is explicitly about messages, it's usually the case that the most important burden is the likely interpretation of the message. Whereas if it's not explicitly about messages, it's usually the case that the most important burden is how it leads to an action. Any questions so far? All right. Let's discuss briefly prioritization of burdens and then possibly do some more examples together. So, as mentioned, burdens are not created equal. We want to focus most time on the burdens that are most important and not waste much on the burdens that are least important. How do we identify which burdens are more important than others? First, and the most important method, because this is the logic behind this, we try to identify which are most likely to be contested. If something is going to be in agreement, we don't need much time to analyze it. If something is going to be contested, we want it to be bulletproof. And for this, we do everything. Like, we use the aid of our partner. Like, we ask them how they would rebut us. We try to think how we would rebut ourselves, etc. Secondly, as a rule of thumb, the burdens which are easiest to analyze are usually the least important. And the burdens which are hardest to analyze are usually the most important. It's not always true, but it's most often true. The reason for this is, if something is easy to analyze, it's a good indication that it is likely just true and intuitive. It's easy to analyze things that are intuitive. And if things are intuitive and just true, it's unlikely people will challenge them, will argue against them. If something is hard, it probably means that it goes against our intuition and more likely to be challenged by the other side. So as a rule of thumb, if you're not sure which burden is more important, actively force yourself to focus on the burdens which are less convenient to you. They are more likely to be the important ones. And lastly, obviously also consult your partner. It's not a one-man job. I see just a general note, not only on burdens, but general teamwork. People tend to think, from what I see in like the early years of debate, that teamwork starts and ends during prep. And this is what we do. Like our speeches are our own work, a solo work. We only think of arguments together. And it's not true. Analysis should also be done together, both before the debate and during the debate. So if I am doing member for a debate, before I come up to speak, I'm going to give my whip a list of my burdens, not like the full argument because they don't have time to read everything, but here are the 3 things I think I need to prove for the argument to stand. Do you think I miss anything? And do you think any of them is more important than the other one? Use your partners, they're there for a reason.
No, that's usually one of the, like, I don't usually do whips. But once I do, like, that's the way that I construct my paper as well. Like, I don't write much on the paper of our argument, but I do write the skeleton, which includes the burdens, which I leave open once my partner is speaking to figure out and to make comments on what he didn't prove or where I can increase some of these stuff. So approach to the whip can be very similar to that, even though I'm not an expert in that subject.
Yeah. Are there any questions on anything we discussed before we go to doing some more constructive examples together?
Yeah, I have a question. So when you, as a judge, can decide that one team loses debate, or you just don't buy an argument of this team because they don't fulfill, this team doesn't fulfill the burden of proof. So even without rebuttal from other team, it should be completely illogical. It should be, I don't know, lie.
So this is a complicated answer, which is very much case by case, depending on what happens in the debate. The general rule is we don't want to step into the debate. If someone didn't actively rebut something, we assume it stands in a vacuum. However, we also remember that another rule of holistic adjudication is that adjudication needs to be comparative. So in the case that teams weren't engaging, they didn't actively rebut one another, we're going to be forced to weigh between different levels of analysis. Like one argument was analyzed well, the other argument was analyzed less well. And then is where I'm going to usually use burdens of proof. So I'm going to ask myself, I'm not going to say, oh, they missed the burden, so the argument completely doesn't stand, because if it wasn't refuted, it sort of stands in a vacuum. But I can say, this team fulfilled all of its burdens, this team missed the burden. Comparatively speaking, it means the analysis of this team was more vulnerable, and therefore, with the absence of engagement from within the debate, should be a metric to weigh them lower. But I would always prefer engagement from within the debate rather than my own interpretation of what happened.
But to be honest, also engagement doesn't mean that I will take it into account. If somebody claims that somebody didn't fulfill the burden, but that burden is either not important or the other team also didn't fulfill the burden, it's very relative. It's very dependent on what happened in the exact debate itself. But sometimes it does warrant an intervention. And I'm going to shamelessly plug Korea video that Techway did for judging. Also, just watch the other videos as well if you're interested more in judging, because it's very good. But this covers this topic. It's it's a very gray topic. It's very fine line where you're not inserting yourself into the debate. But still, if somebody is just shooting a lot of claims, and that's what you see if you ever judge a novice tournament for example, that's what you're doing yourself, right? There is like novices usually have like 7 arguments, and you are internally being like, yeah, but this didn't meet burden of proof itself, right? To some extent. So it's a fine line. You can never dismiss somebody outright and completely based on your interpretation what they needed to prove. It just needs to be in relative term to what other people have done or not done. That's why, as I said, it's not like if you don't do these 4 burdens, then you've lost the argument, then you are out, and you should never rebut the case like this, right? Because if they didn't fulfill one of the burdens, it doesn't mean that the dominoes fall down. It just means that there might be their argument is weaker. Sometimes if they don't fulfill the burden, that means that the whole argument falls down. But you need to be very careful and mindful that it's not very binary. It's not like, they haven't fulfilled this burden, so now dismiss. No. So
Yeah.
so it's very fluid.
Also follow up on that when you're rebutting arguments. It's also important to remember identifying missing burdens is usually effective up until the point that these burdens are fulfilled later on. So if I am DPM and I point out that LO missed a burden, DLO can easily come up and say, okay, I'll fill it in. Here are the links to fill in this burden, and now the rebuttal is worth nothing. So it is fine if I'm up-whip to use this sometimes, but in most cases, because there are other speakers who have the chance to fulfill the burden, I want to not only point out that they didn't fill it, but also give my own explanation as to why it cannot be fulfilled. It's just actively wrong. Any more questions, or do we go to practice? Okay.
So the plan is to do this next week as well. I think to just continue practicing how do you say the burdens. But the best way that we can do it is maybe to just go to the motions that you were given last in the first week that we met, and just you've be given each one of the arguments. So let's just paste. I'll paste one of the arguments here, and then let's just comment on what are the how do you say burdens in this particular argument. Do you think that's fine? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So look at the chat, everybody. The first motion that we had last in the weeks before was this house would financially incentivize healthy lifestyle, so not smoking, exercising, healthy diet. And we got an opposition argument, and the argument is poor people will find it hard to live healthy lifestyles. So let's do the same thing that we did for the cookie cutter examples. Let's do it on this and this example, and the floor is yours.
So to be clear, we were asking you to identify what are the burdens of proof for this argument to stand.
By the way, let's think about it, 30 seconds, a minute. Like you don't have to immediately go. We're fine with silence as well for like at least a minute. And next week you will have to do it individually, but now you can still hide.
Maybe the first one is that it is expensive to live healthily. So like the most basic claim with about, well, a few reasons for that.
Okay, I'll write that in chat as well so we can have the overview. I agree.
Maybe the second burden is why people will want to change their lifestyle even when they have some money for that. So why do they interest in it?
Maybe before that, to explain why those people can change their lifestyle. They just can't take more money, or they just can't take other privilege.
In other words, what are we aiming to prove here is the impact?
I think not. It's just another kind of proving of the stuff that should be proved. Yes?
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong in interpreting what you're going at, but it sounds like what you're suggesting is that we can prove that it won't stop poor people from living unhealthily. That they are unable to just, or most poor people at least, are unable to just stop their unhealthy habits.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we could talk about epistemic access to
To healthy life.
healthy lifestyle, which is a joke you need to explain.
So I think it's important not just to say that it's expensive to live healthy, but that even with this financial support, poor people cannot afford it. So in this case, it will help only rich or just wealthy people to live healthy, but not poor people, because the difference between so they still need much more money to live healthy than state or somebody can give them.
I mean, sure, agree. I would say it's still to some extent in the more high level burden of expensive to live healthy, but you have touched something, which is it's not just about being expensive. Like as he said, like the motions, the argument itself says it's hard, and it can be hard for several different reasons, right? For several different reasons. One of them can be, how do you say, that people, one of them can be going into analysis that people don't have enough time, that people are addicted, and that, how do you say, or something like this. So if you want to make a more higher level impact, it's, how do you say, that poverty is creating barriers to people, how do you say, poverty having barriers to people living healthily, right? To some extent. But a more, like, do you think that we need to prove, and that the important burden here is that living healthily is important? Is that something that is going to be conceded? How do you think, like, that's going to be played? Do you think you need to explain to me for either side? Like, obviously this is an opposition argument, but is that an important thing?
Obviously, no.
Yeah, why?
Because most probably all teams will agree on it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I see in all governments all around the world. Whenever this motion is given, I hear at least 3 to 4 minutes why healthy lifestyle is super important. What are all of the benefits of healthy lifestyle and stuff? And what I see, and that's missed burden, by the way. That's why I wanted to bring it up, right? Because then what happens is opposition just comes out and says we concede. We completely agree with you.
And following up,
I think that is important to mention here why we should care about the poor at all, because if they want healthy lifestyle in both worlds, but for example, middle class will get some money for their healthy habits, why shouldn't we incorporate it?
100% agree. Good. I mean, yeah, go, sorry.
Connecting to this, just to make the bottom line clear and debate winning, as we just said, government is probably going to argue for the benefit of a healthy lifestyle. How do we win this? Why is our argument winning this? We don't want to show just that they will not achieve their goal, because this is just a mitigation, saying it's just ineffective. What is the active harm that comes from the argument?
Mm-hmm. And that is
something about inequality. That poor will not become richer, but the rich one and the wealth one, they will become richer.
I mean, Yes, to some extent, but also like what are taxes? Usually that's also very good. Like financial incentives have to come from somewhere, right? Like, and it's very easy to just claim that this is an inefficient way to do anything like this, because you're just rewarding somebody who's already healthy, who is probably going to be already rich, whilst reducing the funds to do anything else. You don't have to be specific. You just have to talk about. It's a stupid way to do the money, to delegate the money, but
the important point here is just to make sure that you're clear on the impact, or why it is something that we care about, connecting to why we care about poor people in this. Because if everything we prove is just, oh, it will only help rich people, but it won't help poor people, it's not just a mitigation, it also concedes the debate is a good thing. I would just answer to this from prop. Look, unlike opposition, I don't hate the rich. I think even if it helps just some people, it's probably a good thing. You want to show why it actively harms the poor rather than just not helping them, which you can do by showing that taxpayers' money is wasted on something that does not help them.
Sure. And I think that's pretty much it, right? Like, it's a simple argument. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be very complicated in any of this, right? Like the main one still, like, let's do the main one versus the. Oh, 1 second, sorry. Yeah. Let's do the what do you think is the most important one? You have them all in chat.
I think number 4. What is the impact on the poor?
Probably, very probably, because if you don't prove that, like, I would rank them probably 1 and 4 would be almost equal to me, and the 3 and 4, like 3 would be the least important, because just it's unlikely that somebody comes and says fuck the poor, right? So we should still obviously consider that, but it's not as important. Okay, let's do the second one. I just need to close the window, but I'll post it in the chat. And this one is I think very good as in the example, because it has a lot of burdens. So let's figure them out together. The motion is: this House would introduce quotas for women in STEM universities, STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths. So government arguments: we will have good role models for women in STEM. Think about it. I need to close my window 1 second.
Maybe the first one, we will increase the representation of women in the STEM sciences.
Okay, I will say, while it is true that it is a burden, I would note that in this debate particularly, it's probably the least important one, in a way that also probably makes it not necessary to analyze, because the motion literally says we give quotas, so we kind of have a guarantee that there will be more women in STEM. We don't necessarily need to prove this. We have the fiat to say we will force them to take more women.
Okay, I think that the main is why even enrolling using quotas is still a good role model. So I think it's the first thing that will opposition rebuttal.
So the first burden, we want to show why these role models are likely to actually be good ones, why we're going to get quality women for the job. What else?
I think we should explain why such women will succeed on these works, and these role models actually be. I don't know. Is it related to the first one, or it's a separate claim?
I think it's part of the first one. So proving that they are good in their jobs is one way to prove that they are going to be good role models. Not the only way, by the way. There are other ways to show that someone is a good role model, even if they're not the best at their job, such as I could say STEM just looks impressive to everyone who doesn't do it. Even if you're not the best at your field, you're still going to be impressive to the high school girl that has literally no experience in it, and you're probably still better than her. So it looks impressive even if you're quite average. But the easier ways, of course, to show that they will be good in their jobs all goes into the first burden of why they're good role models. What other burdens are there here?
So
why sorry.
Yeah, Mary, go on.
Why we don't have such role models in status quo, and if we have some, why this amount is not enough, and will the increasing amount of them will change something?
Great. We need to start by showing why today we even have a problem. A very easy up response often would be, look, role models aren't about the quantity but the quality. You just need to have 1, 2, 3 role models for everyone to look up to. You don't need to have like hundreds of them.
Okay, I have a claim. Why introducing such quotas will instill women to go on these positions?
Amazing. Connecting back to what we talked about in message arguments, connecting it to the impact. Why role models are motivating to action.
And maybe a final one is not very hard to prove, but anyway, like in terms of impacting, why STEM is good and why women in STEM, more women in STEM are good. So like when more girls are motivated to take up STEM, like why they earn more and I don't know, have more power. And
yeah, I agree. It's important to note, we want to identify all burdens, including the ones that are going to be the less contested than others. We can just then prioritize between them and decide which to put more effort in and which not to. But it's always good to note that we want to prove that it is a good thing in the first place as well.
I think another one is that we should prove that girls would, I don't know, would believe or something like this to those models. Yeah. So if you have a role model, there are girls who would go there. Yeah, more.
So this goes into the like clash about motivating to action, I think. So the fact that you have role models will actually lead women to take up STEM.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Maybe like in message point about interpreting the message, because we are not really understand what kind of model this role model will be. Maybe this role model will be some lazy partying girl who just gets this place in STEM for free. And
so
we should prove that those women who use these quotas will really work in STEM.
So I think this connects back to the first burden we discussed, that we need to prove that these role models are going to be good role models rather than just random women off the street. Is there anything else that you think?
There is one more that we're missing. Yeah.
Do we have to prove that this house can use the quotas as a means of bringing more equality and stuff like that?
I mean, you have fiat in policy debates. You don't need to prove that you're able to do this.
Yeah. We will go into, so this, by the way, this lecture is part 1 of 2, which will not go to next time, but like next time, which is burdens are also connected to the strategy of the debate itself, right? And you still firstly need to figure out how internally burdens in arguments work, and then more globally types of motion burdens and stuff. We will cover that as well. That's a very important topic, but it goes there.
I think what Andrew was trying to say is like whether we have a moral right to use quotas to achieve this end.
Yeah, but is that what I need to prove to win this argument?
I mean, in Russia, people like to say that our quotas are immoral in as a tool.
I actually want to like quickly answer this because it is an important constructive thing to learn about burdens. I think you are correct that some people might challenge the justification of the motion. It, by the way, changes geographically based on norms. Like I think in some circuits, people will just assume it's justified, in some it won't. This connects not to the burdens of the argument, but of the motion. I might have a separate argument of justification, saying this is a moral obligation or something like that. It's not something that I need to prove the bottom line here. So by burdens, we are not discussing what I need to prove to win the motion, but only what I need to prove the bottom line of this specific argument.
Those are 2 separate skills, right? And this, that's why we are focusing just on these ones, because like if people understand better just the argument ones, it's much easier to go to higher level and to zoom out even more. But like if we zoom out too far, then immediately it would be much more difficult. So we're zooming out a bit. But yeah.
So concretely, to prove this bottom line, this specific argument, what might be another burden that we might not have listed yet?
Well, basically, oh no, this one we covered, like how these models are created. So like how women who use quotas become role models, but this is covered by the first one, right?
Could you be more specific about what you mean by this?
I was trying to say that basically we need a link between quotas and like any role models, like why women that go into there will become role models. But midway, I realized that that was covered by the first one.
Okay, so yeah, the first burden, and probably also we'll go through this later, but probably also the most important one in this argument is to prove that these are good role models. And I like that you all identified that quickly.
But it is important that this first one, and that's why I was confused when I first saw it. It's kind of two burdens in one, and that's where the confusion comes from. One is that the role models will be created in the first place. And by the way, and that's like even more high level, right? Like if you want to think about it, it's not even just that these role models will be created from the total pool of women who study STEM now, but for the total pool of difference in women that would not have gone to STEM otherwise. And that's, for example, a good attack potential from opposition, right? From opposition is to say, there will be more role models, but like in today's world, it's not zero women going to STEM in this sort of situation. So it's only the women who would not otherwise go into STEM. And what I would claim is that most women who are role models, who are the best at their like craft, who are CEO of YouTube or whatever, like they would have been in regardless of quotas. And then it doesn't completely destroy the argument. It just significantly mitigates the impact on the argument, if you understand what I mean. So that's an even higher level, like how do you say, burden inside of it, right? So it's not that from total pool of women, some will become role models, but from the pool of women who would be comparative, who would not go, versus women who go anyway, these women make a difference, right? And that's the...
So to clarify just the distinction between this and the first burden and having good role models, in essence, this is what I mentioned that is common in most arguments, why the motion solves the problem. Why in the first place would the motion lead to us getting more women who actually take up STEM, even before role models exist, to create these role models otherwise? So I can say here that because workplaces want and know that they need to have women filling the quota, they now also have an incentive to give more scholarships to women to study STEM, to make sure that they have enough quality employees in the first place to apply. It might mean that more women are likely to, in the first place, choose to study STEM rather than other things because they know that they are very employable in this, and so on.
You just need to figure out which burden you want to take, and that's also why I like this example a lot. And I'm sad that I wasn't here from the get-go to hear the things. But one of the other things is that people go for the highest possible burden, which is to say that now you have more CEOs, so now there's more CEOs who are women, who are in STEM, who are doing programming. So hence, little girls see it. That's usually the way that this argument plays out. And let little girls see it, and then they want to do more STEM, and then it's like a vicious circle until we get equality or something like this. But the problem is you don't have to take that burden. You don't have to take the burden that some of these women would end up being CEOs or being very high level positions. Role model in your life is not necessarily only Bill Gates. It's your aunt who's working, it's your aunt who's working in programming, or it's your friend who you know that went into that place. It's generally more people online writing about this, tweeting tweeting about women in STEM or something. So you can decrease your burden to some extent. And that's, again, a bit more topic for the general strategy thing. But here for this argument, it plays out perfectly, because you can obviously take up the burden to say that there will be more female CEOs, and that's fine, right? That can be one part, but you should also hedge your bets and like layer your burdens in a way that says that even if they prove that I didn't fulfill the burden, that there will be more female CEOs who have super huge impacts. Even the fact that there will be mid-level role models or lower-level role models is still a huge impact in and of itself. And you can even possibly, if you're ballsy enough, claim that it is higher impact than having a female CEO, having this many women who are more approachable, who can talk to people, who can advocate themselves, right? And that's how you need to think about the burdens, right? Like it's always finding the way to, how do you say, layer yourself up for it. So if you're trying and shooting for the hardest burden, obviously, because that will lead you to most impact, but you need to be mindful that sometimes it's very hard for you to fulfill it, that some teams will attack you. So hence, you hedge your bets and have lower burdens as well proven before. I know this is a very complicated topic, but I hope it's not confusing when I'm saying it. Yeah.
Probably that one burden that Hadar meant that we did not name is that why we need at all this STEAM women, like how society or even these women benefit from getting education in science, technology, engineering, maths, and so on.
So this one we actually did list already, like just proving that women in STEM is a good thing and an outcome we want to reach. I think these 5 do cover like generally the burdens of this argument. But the question now, after we did go through them, which do you think are more important and which do you think are less important among these burdens? How would you prioritize between them?
I think that the 4th is not very important because it's quite obvious that education is beneficial for most people.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Which do you think might be the most important burden?
Number 5, normalize this career choice for women.
I think it's one of the most important ones. I think there's one that is possibly equally important to it.
Why not enough today? Like the second one, maybe?
Or the first one. The first one, maybe.
I tend to agree with Artem here. I think proving that these are good role models rather than what opposition is obviously going to say, oh, they're going to lower the standards, so you'll get worse women, and also people will think that they are worse because they only got there due to affirmative action, so people will not credit their work, etc. Probably the most challenged burden here, or one of the most challenged burdens, is going to show that there are indeed good role models. I don't think it is as likely to be challenged that that there is a problem today. Like, it is going to be a challenge to an extent. They're going to mitigate and say it's enough to have a few, but they're probably going to concede that there is a minority of women in STEM today because it's just a fact that's hard to ignore.
Yeah. No, indeed. But as I said, like, you just need to be careful. I don't think anybody will, especially in this day and age, would necessarily try to attack that this one will be super horrible and bad. But the way to try to prevent it is to maybe just use the, use the simple logic. It's not it's mostly has to deal with what women think is available to them rather than the knowledge itself. Like, people who are pushed out, and that's, by the way, another thing when it comes to burdens that you can figure out. They're not pushing out the best men. They're pushing out men who are on the borders as well, right? Like, who are, and that like the difference between like 30 or 40% done test or something like this, it's very marginal how better these men would have been at these than these women. And that's what you want to, that you don't want a judge to have a picture of like an Olympian medal mathematician gets pushed out by a woman who doesn't know how to know. Like, it's literally a dude who kind of sucks. It's not very good, but like maybe it's on the edge, versus a woman who's like either not very interested, not caring. Like, You need to paint the picture to a judge, yeah.
So in other words, in every affirmative action motion, the way that we trade off things on populations is we trade off the least quality or the least qualified and experienced individuals who work today for the most qualified of the group that is not included today. We're going to take more of the most qualified women and lose some of the least qualified men.
Yeah.
And this trade-off becomes easier to win.
But by the way, just one more thing, because it goes. It's not just that if you have a quota, automatically means that women who sign up will be worse. It just means that when you're deciding your major, right? When you're deciding where it depends on what faculty you're going for and stuff like that. Like when you're deciding, you're hedging your bets, right? Like if I think that it's less likely for me to go into a school, I'm not gonna even try, right? But if I think it's pretty sure that I will go into a school and stuff, obviously I don't want to suck. Nobody wants to go into a school and just be like an idiot there or something. So just the fact that I have something for certain means that most likely they're going to do well on test anyway. It's just that they're being scared by their parents, by everybody.
Yeah, there are also like two added nuances that can help you here. One is to show how a lot of the decisions today are extremely close and arbitrary. Like if I get two students apply who have roughly the same CV, like the same grades in school and whatever, I often decide on very arbitrary factors, an interview or whatever. Now I just know if I have almost equal candidates, I would prefer the female one over the male one. That's one thing. The second thing is also to note that this is also impacting the women who get accepted, not necessarily to say that they are not accepted today because they are not good enough. Like one of the things that is helpful to say is some women who are qualified enough today don't get accepted for various reasons, which are not their quality. Whether it is because sexism in interviews, whether it is because they were deterred in high school from taking up like classes that are relevant to STEM because they were socialized to take other things. So the report doesn't actually reflect their skills, but we are able to show that we do have the skills.
Exactly. Shall we do one more and then call it a day, or do you want to? How do you guys?
Can I add something? I mean, is it okay to use a moral judgment? Like, can we just decide that these women will be bad, so let's not take them? Isn't it appropriate, even for opposition, to claim that women who are that people, not just any people who are getting quotas are bad or evil or lazy? So yeah.
There is a nuance to this. I would never try and claim that people who get accepted through quota are terrible humans and lazy and whatever, because A, it's not convincing, B, it might offend people, and it's just not a very popular argument to say today. The way to go at it to show that they are bad role models isn't to show that they are terrible humans or lazy, but A, that they might be perceived as such. Even if they do the best job, when people know that they got in through quota, it will make people underrate and undermine their achievements. And B, if I say that they are going to be, comparatively speaking, seen as less good in their job than their male counterparts, because they got in through quota and male got in without quota. So when they will be directly compared, they will often have less achievements. Especially one of the things that opposition likes saying in these debates is that this motion comes in too late. The desocialization away from STEM doesn't start at 18 when you take up an academic degree. It starts at 5 when you go to a certain class in school. And at this point, even if women have the equal potential to be as good as men, they are so less experienced by this point in actually taking up classes relevant to this, because society took them away from this throughout all these years, that it is too late now.
But also, like, to be honest, But to be honest, for these types of motion, and that's again the problem is, again, we're going into specific argument burdens. But if we were to do a lecture, and which we are going to do on motion, on motion specific strategy burdens, right? One of the burdens for Gav here is definitely to show that this is the best policy compared to the alternatives, because from op, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to concede most of the things and just say, yeah, let's just not do this. Let's just not do quotas. Let's do more education in elementary schools. Let's do million other things that are not this policy, and that's usually why this motion is not getting set anymore, because it just allows opposition to just counterprop and do something much milder and even much more targeted towards the issue, and leaves government in a bit of a awkward situation, I'd say. But yeah.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Third, or like how do you guys feel? Are you tired, or do you want more or less? That's the.
Let's make one more.
Okay, let's do one more.
Yeah.
This should be an easy one. So I'm going chronologically. I'm not just picking this. So the way that we did it last time. So the third one is, this House believes that universities should continue with primarily online teaching post COVID-19. And it's a government argument that says this makes universities more accessible. This should be a fairly simple one.
Well, like the first one is like, if the problem exists, if universities are not accessible enough, like in non-COVID situation.
That's the truth. Are not
the second one is that they would be more accessible because people may have no internet.
I actually think these might be two separate burdens. So the way I would do this would be first to show that the barriers in the status quo are removed. And then a separate one would be that new barriers are either not created or less important than the existing barriers.
Maybe explain why do we have to prioritize accessibility above, for example, the quality?
I think it gets close at something that is a burden. I would want to try and make it slightly more generic than compare it to a very specific argument from the other side. You're correct that we want to make it comparative. My advice is usually not to compare towards a specific argument, because most often you don't expect and predict all of the arguments opposition will run. So you want to make it comparative to anything they might run. How would you do that?
Maybe that it is still good? Like that online education is still good?
But that would be more again going into, and I know we're correcting this several times now, but that is true. That is the burden for government still, but it's not the burden for this argument in particular, right? That would be the second argument that would be preemptive argument that I run from government for sure. But it's not, as I said, like it's not the specific argument. Yeah.
Maybe it will decrease the costs of education.
So this goes into burdens we have already listed, I think. So when we want to explain why it removes barriers, we will probably do this by also using price as one of the mechanisms for reducing barriers.
Do we need to prove that accessibility is good and important?
I think we need to prove that people who will get education will be able to get utility out of their new knowledge and so on.
No, but sure. But as I said, I usually, what I hear is most, and that is like why am I asking this question? Like, it's kind of a loaded question. It's not like, it is kind of a burden, but in most of the debates it will not play out. Like, everybody will concede that accessibility is important, or they will challenge that this is actually more accessible. That's the strategy from op, right? But nobody's going to be like, yeah, fuck accessibility, fuck these people who are, but given that this is true, what I'm just saying, it goes against what I'm seeing in most of these debates when they play out. I saw this debate, I think, 2 times play out. In most situations, government are just going for, this is more accessible, this is more accessible, here is 7 reasons why accessibility is super important. And it is sometimes, like when you're weighing stuff, you should obviously talk about why accessibility is more important than something else. But why accessibility is important in itself, and spending 3 to 5 minutes on it is just a waste of time to some extent, that you could have spent on like these 2 burdens that we have. Like, this argument is pretty simple. I think it's fine with 2 burdens. And like, maybe we're missing some, no, by the way, obviously, we're not exhaustive of everything, every burden that exists in the whole planet. Like, oh, but somebody might think of a third or fourth one, but I think these two are the most important, right? And that my intuition would be just to focus on these, right?
I agree. I would caveat, though, that the way to improve this argument or make it more debate winning is not to prove accessibility is important, because this would be considered, but to do the comparative aspect of it. Accessibility is most important. Accessibility is the main thing we care about in the academia.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Especially, and this is especially what people are missing, is that people sometimes just want to, and this is again going into strategy that we need to talk about. So when you talk about burdens, people usually think that they can just prove that this is going to be accessible and just disprove that it's not going to lack in quality. But usually there's going to be some trade-off, and usually we'll have to do at least an even if, that is going to say, even if it's less quality, who the fuck cares? Here's why accessibility is more important always than is, hey, that's a very cute cat. But yeah, again, I know I'm annoying with this, but we will cover this strategic overview of burdens, not next time, but the time afterwards, because that's also super important thing. Realizing what your burden is and what other teams' burdens are, and trying to raise or decrease or increase burdens is a strategic thing that's super important. But yeah. Do we want to do one more, or do we want to just call it quits today and practice? The goal is to practice this thing next week at least, right?
I also, by the way, advise, like, it's good that we are doing practice here together. Practice doesn't need to be limited only to times that we have lessons. Take this home as well. Take it on arguments that we did on the last session, or take it to arguments that you struggled proving in recent debates, and try to think how, in retrospect, you would have proven them. What would be the burdens? And if you have questions, if you're not sure, bring them to the next session or send them to us through Artyom. Probably we can help you with those. Try to actively find them yourself first, because it's the most important skill. If you struggle, ask questions.
Yeah. But I think it's fine to just, yeah, go Art, I'm sorry.
I think you're never going to hear from these people that we need to stop. But at some point, we need to be logical and just be realistic.
I think it's fine. I think it's fine to pause it at the time. Yeah. I think we did 3 examples. We did some cookie cutter examples as well. Artem, I think you can also circulate the video amongst people. So if somebody missed something, if they want to return back, you can return back to it. As I said, I would advise you to start doing this. Like, if you can't still do it during the live debate. So next week we will probably have a debate rather than anything else, and then in 2 weeks' time we practice this again. Just try to include this after the debate. So, for example, you've done your PM or whatever OG speech or whatever. So just take 10 minutes after the debate is done, or during somebody who's making adjudication, to just map out, here's what my argument was, let me figure out 3 or 4 burdens that I had to prove. And then you can even ask the judge, here are the burdens that I think are burdens in my argument. Do you think this is correct? And then the judge can tell you, I don't think so, I think so. How did I fare on these 4 burdens? So just, you need to, like, if you want to change some of these things, you need to actively start thinking about it, because this is unlearning some of the things that our brains do automatically. And that's what I told you. The cycle is something is in the back consciousness. You need to bring it to forefront, something that you think about very clearly, and then return it to the subconsciousness with the new learned better improvements. Yeah.
I really can't emphasize enough the practice makes perfect point of this. Today, Milos and I can think quite quickly on the burdens for these arguments, because we've done them so much. It's always hard at the beginning, and there's this immediate temptation under time pressure in a debate to go through the fall back on the easy system of just why true, why important, and then we miss burdens. Actively try this. Even if it's going to be hard and waste time in the first few debates that you do this, take a few fourths until you learn how to do this properly. This is the best way to learn.
Yeah, it's better to practice on a practice round or a random tournament than to go to WDC and then practice there. you already need to be ready at that point. So just use your practice, and that's a general point. Again, I'm re-emphasizing, but like it's not just about the burdens. General point, use your practice to try something new. You don't go into practice, I'm gonna now do my speech as I do it always. No, let me try something weird, not super weird, but let me try to do prep like this. Let me try to do this for the arguments or something like this. And our advice for next month, focus on burdens. And that's what we're gonna be focusing on with you as well. Okay. I mean, that is our closing statement of encouragement to you. And yeah, we're free to you can ask us if you think something during the week. Just send it to Artem if you don't have us personally, and we can address it next time. Yeah.
And thank you guys for this. I think it was a very cool workshop, and thank you again for doing this. And see you next time.
Yeah. See you next time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.